We're now joined on the line by Sami Arian, Director of the Center for Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul Zaim University. Sami, originally from Palestine, and now relocated to Turkey, a prominent speaker and human rights activist. Sami, assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us on Radio Islam International.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Thank you for inviting me.
Let's start off, Sami, by speaking about President-elect Donald Trump, where he recently demanded that Hamas release Israeli captives and saying and warning that all hell will break out otherwise. How are these remarks being received, by the Palestinians and by other by human rights activists?
I don't think it's been received seriously. I mean, what else could he do that Netanyahu and his fascist government hasn't done already? Netanyahu and the Zionist regime has been for 15 months now bombing relentlessly Gaza. They've killed and injured over 150,000, perhaps as much as 200,000 when you consider the missing. They displaced millions of people. They destroyed every aspect of Gaza's civilian life. So what is he going to drop an atomic bomb? Trump is what he's doing is resorting to cowboy diplomacy. This is a product of supremacist and imperialist mind. He thinks that by threatening the resistance, if that's what he aims, or trying to coerce them or intimidate them, that somehow they're going to do his bidding. The framework of the negotiations, the terms of an agreement, have been out there since at least last May. And this was presented to the resistance as an Israeli proposal given by Biden. The terms are that Israel would withdraw from Gaza eventually. There will be relocation of the current, where they are occupying now in the current positions. There will be a permanent ceasefire guaranteed by the mediators, one of which, of course, is the United States, in addition to the Qataris and the Egyptians. There will be an exchange of prisoners. The terms of this exchange also have been set a long time ago. Every time they have some kind of an agreement, Netanyahu comes and changes the conditions by which these terms, this agreement, have been already reached. So always he backs out from every commitment he has made. We've seen, for example, that they have agreed on a list of prisoners, the elderly, women, the sick. Then he came back and added more names. The resistance says, fine, we're going to accept this, but these names, the soldiers, they will have a different equation, a different formula for the release. You can't just say, after we agree that for the women, for the injured, for the elderly, we're going to have this ratio of exchange and these type of prisoners on the Palestinian side will be released. Then at the last moment, you come and add my soldiers and say, I would like to the same conditions, the same formula. That's not going to happen. That's not the case. We've already agreed that the soldiers will have a different formula and different type of prisoners. When they reach an agreement that he will relocate, reposition the Israeli troops to within, let's say, 500 meters of the border, we agree on this. And then the last moment he comes and says, no, I'm not going to do that. It's going to be 1,500 meters. So every time they reach some kind of an agreement with the witnessed by the mediators, he comes back and changes the terms. That's the way it's been. And I think it's a stalling tactic. He's trying to get it to the point where Trump would be president, hoping that somehow with these blustering words from Trump, that somehow the Palestinians will succumb and submit to his wishes.
Sami will speak a bit more about the ceasefire and the negotiations, but I just want to come back to that statements by Trump. That type of statements, does it add to fears of increased U.S. involvement in the region?
I mean, the U.S. has been up to its ears. Let's not forget that this war of extermination against the Palestinians, this genocide being perpetrated by the Zionist regime for the past 460 plus days, could not have taken place without the complicity of the United States. The US has been a full partner in this. So it's not something that they will be involved in. They have already been involved up to their ears. They provided 22, I repeat, $22 billion of weapons, that's with a B, to Israel in order to commit these war crimes. And before he leaves office this week, Biden added another 8 billion. That's $30 billion that have been given to Israel so that it can commit its atrocities, its genocide, its war crimes on the Palestinians. 365 kilometers square could not have been smaller area in the history of warfare where you're going to have all these kind of weapons unloaded on the Palestinians. We're talking about several Hiroshimas being dumped on this little Gaza. It could not have been done without the United States. So what is Trump going to do? I mean, it is so ridiculous what he's saying and so ridiculous what the US is doing. It's just another way of trying to pressure the weaker side, the Palestinians, in order to get Israel whatever it wants. Let's remember that Netanyahu has been promising his people what he called complete or absolute victory. He hasn't been able to achieve that. The Palestinians have not surrendered. Hamas hasn't been dislodged from influencing what's going on in Gaza. So he's failed to achieve his objectives. The third objective was to get the captives released unconditionally through military pressure. He's also failed to do so. So with the failure of his three objectives, he is unable to make a decision. So he's waiting for Trump to come, and somehow with Trump's threats that the people will say, okay, sir, we are going to do what you want. That's not going to be the case.
And you mentioned this, Sami, that one of the stumbling blocks when it comes to the ceasefire and the negotiations is Netanyahu changing the conditions at the last minute, whether it's adding soldiers to the list of hostages that needed to be released, whatever it may be. But since then, are the negotiations still ongoing? Is there any hope for a ceasefire?
Well, they have been ongoing. The last stumbling block is that the Hamas gave 34 names. These are the same names that the Israelis were demanding. Hamas agreed. Hamas asked for 3 days of stopping the war so that they can go and account for them. No one knows whether some of these people are dead or alive, injured or uninjured. What's been happening is that these captives are scattered throughout Gaza with certain groups, not all of them are Hamas, and in certain areas. So we can't account, they say, the resistance, that they couldn't account for them. They needed some time to go and make sure if they're alive or not alive, and whether they are injured or uninjured, so that they can proceed with the process. It was agreed upon that there will be few days of reprieve, of calm, of no bombing, that the planes will stay away from the skies of Gaza so that they can account for them. But once that got to the last point, then Netanyahu said, no, that's not going to be. We're going to be relentless. We're not going to stop. They need to account for them with the war going on. And the Hamas said, we simply cannot do it. It's not feasible for us to do this.
Yeah, and the bombing just seems to continue. I read today on Al Jazeera's report that 46 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli attacks across Gaza, and that's since dawn, just today. 31 of them killed in the north, and that is according to medical sources that spoke to Al Jazeera. Any other update on the current situation in Gaza, particularly with regards to this latest attack, Sami?
Well, it's part of what Netanyahu and the Zionist regime have been trying to do, which is to put as much military pressure on the resistance as possible to achieve their goals, the declared goals, which they haven't been able to do. But I think deep down, one of the objectives of this genocide is to make Gaza unlivable for the Palestinians, hoping that somehow the Palestinians will pack and leave. Since October 7th, 2023, that's for the past 15 months, they've killed tens of thousands of Palestinians, they displaced millions, and yet the Palestinians are still resilient, are still steadfast, determined to stay on their own land, even though it's been ruined completely. The people who've left are under these tremendous pressures do not exceed 150,000 out of 2.2 million. And while the Palestinians may have lost as much as 50,000, yesterday they came the census that there were as much Palestinians born in the past year as those who were deceased. So what are you going to do with the Palestinians? I mean, he's trying. As Rabin once said, former prime minister, he would wake up one day and find that Gaza has drowned in the Mediterranean. That's not going to happen. So Israel would still have to deal with this demography, even if they finish off all the resistance movements today. They still have over 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, over 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank. You have another 2 plus, maybe 2.2 million Palestinians in the 1948 areas. There are more Palestinians today in the territory between the river and the sea than there are Jews. So Israel cannot kill to get out of this dilemma. There has to be some kind of a resolution. But as long as we have Zionism, a supremacist, exclusivist, racist ideology that wants to dominate the Palestinians, wants to exile the Palestinians, wants to get rid of the Palestinians, we're never gonna have peace. So the only way to stop the carnage and the killing is to change the structures, is to deconstruct Zionism. In other words, we need to dismantle all the racist structures within the land of Palestine, the historical land of Palestine. That's the only way we can do it. Now, if they insist on having a Zionist state, a Zionist structures, then conflict will continue. So it's not about whatever terms they come with in order to release a few dozens here and there. It's about the future of the region and the future of Palestine and the future also of the Zionist enterprise. I don't think Israel will be able to win ultimately because it's just against history. It's against everything that we learn. For Israel to survive, it really has to kill all the Palestinians and then try to rule over all the tens of millions of Arabs in the region to make sure that they will be dominant over this region for centuries. What is the likelihood of that? Even though they may have temporarily tactical advantage in terms of their alliance with the greatest power, the superpower, United States, even though they may have had 70 years of dominating militarily the region, that is not guaranteed that it's going to continue forever. And therefore, I believe that ultimately, and people have seen what few hundred people could do in terms of being able to bring the nose of this Zionist entity into the ground. That's what happened on October 7th. It was a prison break. People were able to break out of prison and really bring this haughtiness, this superfluous state, this supremacist state, and teach it a lesson. Their response was to commit atrocities to the scale that people have not seen in decades, the war crimes, the genocide. And therefore, Zionism has been exposed. Zionism is not an enlightening ideology. Zionism is not a civilized concept. Zionism is all about dominance and control and killing. And we've seen what they were capable of doing. And therefore, I think history will tell us, and the future will show us, will show us that Zionism cannot survive in this environment.
And what about the Israeli army's ongoing conflict in southern Lebanon? Is there any hope of withdrawal from that region?
That's a great question because they are, under the terms of the agreement, obligated to withdraw by the 27th of January. It would have been 2 months of temporary ceasefire in which they have committed to withdraw. Now, Israeli media and many political voices are saying that that's not going to happen. The idea was that they would withdraw and would be replaced by the Lebanese army. If that doesn't happen, then we may have another perhaps battle between Hezbollah and Israel, in which it will be again deja vu. Israel will start bombing the civilian areas, destroying southern Lebanon and Beirut and other places. And then there will be a response from Hezbollah in which they will not be able to bring back their settlers to the northern portion, northern parts of Palestine. And therefore, we're back to this tit for tat. They have threatened that not only they will not withdraw, but they want complete freedom of movement to make sure that there will never ever be any kind of resistance to their occupation, either in southern Lebanon or in Syria or in other places. We've seen them also in the past few weeks, not only withdrawing, but expanding. In Syria, they've already occupied 1,150 kilometers square kilometers in the Golan Heights. And then after the fall of Bashar al-Assad, they went and not only devastated whatever the remnants of the Syrian defense forces, but also they have occupied another 400 kilometers square. So we're talking about an expansionist state that does not stop at any red line. Whenever it has the opportunity to occupy, to kill, to expand, to humiliate the others, they do it. I mean, there are not only no red lines for them, but there is no respect for any law, international, humanitarian, conventions, Geneva conventions, you name it. Nothing stops them. They're just willing to cross all boundaries in order to achieve and fulfill their objectives.
And Sami, before we let you go, just uh, coming back to Gaza, the dire situation in Gaza with this ongoing genocide, has there been any hope of the delivery of humanitarian aid and essential supplies to Gaza? It's now going into winter, severe conditions. We've heard of babies that are dying of hypothermia and so on. Are there any or is there any hope of humanitarian aid getting into Gaza?
Unfortunately, uh, the Zionist regime hasn't just been killing and shelling and droning and assassinating Palestinians. They've also prevented them from getting the necessary food for survival. They have been preventing them from getting any kind of medical aid, even though they have some severe injuries and severe illnesses that people are suffering from, but also shelter. There are no shelters, so people have been dying, as you say, from hypothermia, from the severe cold, and they really don't care. I mean, they really don't care. So there hasn't been any movement. That the problem is not just with Israel, but with also Egypt and other places, which could actually enforce the humanitarian aid to reach there. But it hasn't, because this is being used as another club on the head of the resistance. It will be used another point of leverage, in order to get Palestinians to surrender, and they haven't surrendered. We've seen, for example, 57 countries meeting last year and this year in trying to enforce some kind of humanitarian aid. The Muslim countries did not make any decisions whatsoever to confront the Zionist enemy. All what they were able to agree to was to deliver humanitarian aid. Yet, 57 countries could not bring one bottle of water to a thirsty child without Netanyahu saying so. We have the United Nations making demands and taking resolutions in the Security Council, in other forms, in other forums. We've seen more than 2, 3 votes, each with 160, 170 nations making certain demands. None of them came to fruition. We saw the International Court of Justice ordering Israel to stop its genocide and to allow humanitarian aid. Israel totally ignored it. We have saw the International Criminal Court indicting the Prime Minister, the Crime Minister of Israel, and his War Minister, and yet nothing has happened. So Israel has been defying the will of the whole world because they think that they can get away with it. They are being protected by the United States. The United States is shielding them from any blame, any criticism. The United States has been criticizing or has been pressuring all countries that lift a finger to say anything about this Israeli aggression. So, with this kind of environment, the Israelis don't really care whether the Palestinians die or live, whether they're injured or suffering, whether they can actually be protected from the severe court or not. All what they are concerned about, because of this twisted, supremacist, racist, exclusivist, aggressive ideology that doesn't care about anyone else but themselves, and that they are going to force whatever demands they want on the Palestinians. But the Palestinians have shown resilience, steadfastness, courage, and determination that they're not going to submit to the Israelis until they get their freedom, even with the enormous suffering that we have seen. The bottom line is this: unless there are serious demands and accountability by the Muslim countries, by the international community, by those who can make a difference, we are not going to see much change in the situation in Gaza.
Sami, Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you so much for joining us on Radio Islam International. Lovely having you on, and thank you for providing us with insight on what's going on in Gaza.
Thank you very much.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And that was Sami Arian speaking about the dire situation in Gaza. And like he mentioned there towards the end, the resilience of the Palestinian people is extraordinary. Amid the genocide in Gaza that has been now, 15 months, you still see the resilience, the belief that the people of Palestine have. And we pray and we continue to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to Allah remove their suffering and remove the oppressors. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them victory over the oppressors. 25 minutes.